Namo tassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So, page number 44, please. We are going to continue with the lesser discourse on emptiness. I think we should, because we did not go that far, we were talking, speaking a lot about the details of the sutta. So let's continue from paragraph 4, although we have already done the paragraph. All right. The perception of the forest. Ananda, just as this mansion of Megara's mother is empty of elephants, cattle, horses, and Mars empty of gold and silver, empty of the gathering of women and men, empty of the gathering of women and men. And there is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness, unity, dependent on the community of monks. So too a monk, not dependent. So too a monk, not attending to the perception of the village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the oneness, dependent on the perception of the forest. His mind plunges into that perception of the forest. Someone is trying to get into the Zoom class, asking for their password. Okay. Attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of the forest. His mind plunges into that perception of forest, brightens with faith, becomes steady, and is resolute, right? Now, we won't brush through the greater details of what we have just read, but what we are speaking about, or what the sutra is inclining as or towards this concept of emptiness, is, as understood, a derivative of a state of mind which is freed from one, the perception of the village, right? The perception of village which resonates, or which is talking about, or which gives us an idea of what a village would be, meaning representing that state of constant state of fluctuation, arising and passing away, different energies, different vibrations, different objects, the inability to focus because there are so many objects. This is what is referred to as the perception of the village. From the perception of the village, we have moved on to the perception, right? Perception dependent, or oneness dependent upon the community of monks. This is referring to samadhi, right? Samadhi, which has been attending to the perception or dependent upon the community of monks. Dependence on the community of monks represents a state of solitude, a state which allows for oneness of mind to arise. It talks about, or gives us an idea of reflection to understand a state, or pointing at how a community of monks are aware, aware of these fluctuations, aware of the arising and passing away of different objects, aware of the fact of impermanence, suffering, non-self in each and every moment, in each and every piece of phenomena, in each and every moment of time, right? Relating to now the mind developing or in this sort of metamorphical journey, which allows a monk to prosper beyond, allows a person to prosper beyond or to go beyond the perception of the village, right, into the perception or a oneness dependent upon the perception of a monk. So too, a monk not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of forest. What is the perception of people? Happiness and sorrows of people, right? People have stories. These stories again represent the happiness, the sorrows, the experiences, the ups and downs of humanity, right? We are reminded of this perception of the people all throughout the Dhammapada, right? One who laughs, one who cries, one who loves with, one who wails with, the people know not the truth of Dhamma, right? The Buddha says, one who is sort of happy and sort of enjoy with the experiences and attached to the experiences of the people will never know the fruit of Nibbana, right? Now, what this is saying now, we are all people, including the Mahasangha, who has then been able to go forth and become enlightened beings, or any sort of enlightened being. We are all people, right? But so this is not reflecting on people per se, but this is reflecting to the attachment and dependence we have towards the affairs of people, meaning the world, right? Created by people, right? Created by people. So this is why this is, in a way, to say it is not to sort of make our hearts hard and sort of, it's so hard that it gives a sort of a ricochet effect when a bullet hits it. It's not that kind of thing. This is the solemn understanding and the non-dependence, the independence of a person's mind from the happinesses and the sorrows of the world, right? It would have been perfect and the Buddha would have never even existed if the world was just a happy place. Then there would be no reason for a Buddha. And we know that Buddhas do not arise when the hindrances are not rampant, right? In times when men and women, persons, do not have hindrances, the Buddha or very less amount of hindrances, the Buddha does not arise because there is no need. And even if a Buddha arises, people would just not understand what suffering is, because suffering is at an absolute minimal. The bodies are healthy, lifestyles are healthy, relationships are healthy, life is wonderful at the time. So even though a Buddha rises and comes into being and preaches the doctrine, no one really would be able to understand what this person is going on about, because for them it is not a realistic experience, suffering, right? But however, the Buddhas always arise in the world when people go through suffering. Suffering is one of those, in a way, anecdotes that leads and helps one to pave one's way into what we sort of sort out as happiness or nibbana. And that is what it is referring to here as a perception of people, that those ups and downs, the attachment that one has towards these different segregation of emotions that arises, the different types of emotions that arises within people, right? All right, moving on. There are none here. There is only this much disturbance, namely the oneness dependent upon the perception of the forest. Now, there is only this much disturbance, namely the oneness dependent upon the perception of the forest, right? Page number 45. He understands this. In the field of perception is empty of the perception of the village. Now, this field of perception, right? Now, this field of perception is referring to what? It is referring to the perception of the village, the perception of the people, the perception of the forest. All three types of those perceptions, right? Because why? This, the word this, right? This field of perception, right? So then, as a collective of the perception of the village, perception of the people, and perception of the forest, what does that represent, right? Now we have the village, and we spoke about what the village represents, and we all sort of pitched in last time we had this class, right? We spoke about the perception of people now as well, right? And we pitched in about what the perception of people could be. And now we have this perception, right? And then we had the perception of the forest, right? Then we have now this referring to this field of perception all together. What does it represent? All three parts. It represents the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to that cessation of suffering. Because you see, it talks about suffering, the generalized term of its suffering, the village, right? Which, no one can be the village. A village is a commune, is a collective. We are a village together. And then the perception of people, which is the attachment to those affairs created by the village. And then we have the perception of the forest, which is a sense of detachment from those perceptions and clingings that we have towards this sort of petty, we are using the word petty, to these lowly states that we sort of preoccupy ourselves and distract ourselves with reference to the village and the people. These and the perception of the forest is that way of detachment. This together we find the Four Noble Truths, right? Hinting at suffering, the causes of that suffering, and the way out of that suffering, right? We haven't found it yet. We are still in the level of perception, right? We are still in the level of perception. Now, of the Four Noble Truths, now this field of perception, it is talking about that scope, right? That scope is empty of the perception of the village. This scope is empty of the perception of the village. Now we are talking, now we are talking about the field of perception. Now again we are saying is empty of the perception of the village. Remember how Suññata works, right? Let's go on. This field of perception is empty of the perception of people. There is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the forest, right? Now this is very important, right? Our lives, when we meditate, Saturday, Sunday, every day, almost all of you meditate almost every day, right? At least for a short time. You meditate, and at that time of meditation, is a person free of the sufferings of the world? No. The suffering of the world is within that person, all around this person, mind and body, and in each and everything that is around the person, whether it is owned by that person or not, it is all around and within us, suffering. When we close our eyes and go into a state of contemplative awareness, this suffering does not disappear, right? This suffering does not disappear. The suffering is there in the world, just like, for example, think of the temperature. We might lose the sensations because of our one-pointedness. However, has the temperature now disappeared? No, the temperature is there. Our mind is not there. The temperature is there, just like the air. The air is there. There is polluted air, there is pure air, right? Although the air in my house might not be polluted, does not mean that there is no polluted air, right? The switch, this sort of differentiation of perception from the state of affairs that is present at the moment, whilst we are practicing this sense of emptiness, Suññata, we switch, although we are not contemplative of that part of suffering, our mind is focused on another part. What is that other part? One pointedness, right? One pointedness. Meaning, now, for example, there are all of these different, now, for example, when we are practicing Vedananupassana, the sensations meditation, right? And we are scanning from one part to the other, we are scanning the body in hopes of arousing a state of awareness over the rising and the passing away of the different sensations. At the moment, your mind is focusing upon the shoulders and trying to sort of, or rather experiencing the rising and passing away of sensations at the shoulders. This does not mean that there are no sensations all around the body. The causes for the sensations are all around. However, because your mind is focused upon and entirely focused upon that part of the shoulder, the other sensations around the body do not become apparent, right? Do not become apparent. Now let us read that sentence again. This field of perception is empty of the perception of people. There is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the forest. The oneness which is dependent upon the perception of forest, referring to samadhi, right? Referring to samadhi. Now I'm going to explain that again. Simply, what this paragraph implies is the shift of awareness and understanding. No, not understanding. The shift of awareness from first the perception of the village to the perception of the people. Both the perception of the village and the people now no longer affecting one's mind, because one's mind, from the emptiness of the perception of the village and the perception of people, now is in a state of oneness dependent upon the perception of the forest, right? Perception of the forest. The example for this sort of practice is the kasina. The kasina appears. I've explained the process to you, right? And then when we move from the fourth kasina, or that object, right, where we make the wheel, or rather the sphere of the kasina disappear, and now our point of contemplation becomes the space which is left by the kasina disappearing, right? Similarly, now the village has disappeared, the people have disappeared, and what is in the mind? What is left in the mind is the state of oneness. How has this state of oneness been possible? How is a person all of a sudden able to achieve or attain to this state of oneness? It is because of the lack, the word is lack, of the perception of the village and people, right? Now, that is why, when your life might be going terribly wrong sometimes it's going terribly well, right? And then we have times when it's going terribly wrong. In both these instances, you must endeavor to keep on meditating. You must endeavor to keep on meditating. Of course, with proper guidance, with the proper support of Kalyan Mitras, one must continue to meditate. Why? Not meditating is what? Attachment to the perception of village, attachment to the perception of people. As far as, as long as one finds oneself entrenched, entangled with the perception of the village and the perception of the people, one will not excel to the higher states. Why? This is not because, some miraculous thing, because of the hindrances. You're always going to be dependent. We are always going to be sort of dependent upon people around us, dependent upon the world to be okay for us to be okay. We are going to be depending upon our health, everything which is impermanent in the world, everything which is by, you don't need to be Buddhist, you don't need to read a book of Dhamma to understand that things are going to diminish, that things lose value, that things are not going to be forever. You don't need, you just need a bit of eye, you just need your eyes really, or even a sense of touch, right? A person can understand that things do not last, right? That things do not last. Attaching yourself, clinging on to something which is in a constant flow of change and absorbing the life force for your happiness through these things is a futile attempt. As long as you're dependent upon that futile mechanism, your mind is always going to go through the rocky road of emotions. The rocky road of emotions. That is what here it is saying. We free ourselves from the perception of the village and free ourselves from the perception of people. Do you have any questions? Okay. Anyone can ask questions. Please don't worry if, don't think it's, small, stupid questions. No, there is no such thing. Okay. So anyone, you can ask questions anytime that you want to. Okay. Now let's move on. Thus he regards what is not there as empty. Thus he regards, right, what is not there as empty. But as to what remains there, he knows what that is. There is this, right? Again, now we have to, don't forget what we had just spoken about. We have spoken about the scope in the previous line. We have spoken about the scope of the Four Noble Truths, which is instigated by the words, this field of perception, referring to the three different categories, the village, the people, and the forest. From there, it takes us to a state of oneness, which is again dependent upon the perception of the forest. Now it is coming to, thus he regards what is not there as empty. Now this practice is a contemplative practice here, right? A sense of being aware over the situation and state of the object, or the state of the mind, rather, at that moment, right? That is where this word regards comes from, samanupasati, right? What is not there as empty. Now, whatever which is not there is empty. It's not there, right? Now, this attitude is taken because, remember, when we meditate together, I sometimes tell you, what is it that I tell you? I tell you, for example, with anapana or even with the sensations, I tell you, imagine that it is, the mind is there, and then you have the object, right? Everything else is irrelevant, everything else is not important, and even if you can go to the extent of saying nothing else exists, right? To sort of give you the isolation necessary for you to now focus upon the object at hand, right? The object at hand. This is similar to that, if you can see. Because now, remember, from this sort of scope that we are speaking of, and with words such as oneness, what we are essentially speaking of is a state where we are rather free from everything else around us, where we are entirely devoted to this object which is, right? To this object which is, speaking of a mind which is committed to the subject at hand, right? Referring to the mind which is committed to the subject at hand, right? That is what we are speaking of here, right? So when a certain thing is not there, there is nowhere else to look, right? Now, for example, if there is something that I require, and it is not on the table, right? This table that I work from or teach from, this table, if there is nothing which is here, then I don't have that thing. Do you get it? I'm no longer going to be running all around the place looking for what it is that I want. My world is here, right? My world is here. That is denoted by, how is that possible? That is possible because of a state of oneness of mind. Because now the scope that you sort of look at, right? If I am directly looking at the computer right in front of me, nothing else exists. And if that thing which I'm looking for, or through my awareness, I know, okay, Microsoft Word is not open. Because it is not open, it is not there. I'm not looking anywhere else. I'm not searching for it anywhere else. My mind clearly comprehends that this specific object is not there, hence it is empty of it, right? Of it. Empty of it. Now here, let's come back to the sentence. Thus he regards, now when here samanupasati is used, samanupasati is a state of being able to review, visit, to make visible, to see something with a contemplative effort, right? With a contemplative effort. What is not there as empty. But as to what remains there, he knows what that is there, this is, right? Now, this is referring to the truth of suffering, right? Because remember, now we would be learning this. Actually, you all probably would understand this now. Except we are taking the 89, right? Except the 8 lokotara chittas, all else is dukkha satcha, right? Except the 8 supramundane consciousnesses, which is the path and fruit of sainthood or different levels of sainthood, all the other remaining chittas belong to dukkha satcha. Dukkha satcha refers to, so anywhere that there is dukkha satcha means that it is the truth of suffering. Dukkha is suffering, satcha is truth, right? Satcha is truth. Does anyone have a question about that? Why do you think the 5th jhana is dukkha satcha? You can unmute the mic if you like. Why is the 5th jhana dukkha satcha? Yes, Padma.
Is it because it's not permanent?
It is not permanent. Anything else?
You can easily go back, fall from that jhana to another lower realm.
Sure.
So the suffering can come back.
Sure. Yes, anything else? Anyone else? Why is the 5th jhana dukkha satcha?
You haven't realized the stream entry yet?
Yeah, but it can't just be dukkha satcha because of stream entry, no?
Well, because you still have a sense of self then. The Sakkaya Ditthi hasn't got broken.
Yeah.
So if you have got me and the other, you're still living in duality. You're still living in... So then there is always going to be suffering because there's you and the other. So then all those... you're deluded and you will have all those...
Yeah.
And sort of, and the, what you call the 8 vicissitudes of life will be there. So there's going to be suffering one day.
Yes. Yes. And what else? Is that all? Is that all? Dukkha satcha is dependent upon the existence of avidya and tanha, right? Dukkha satcha is dependent upon the attraction that one has towards the panchaskandha, the 5 aggregates, which allows these dhammas to flourish, right? Hence, these things which you can fall away from is dukkha satcha, right? Is dukkha satcha. Because one has not attained or achieved nibbana. So yes, Padma and Dil, both of you are correct, right? So here, okay, yes. So this is the truth of suffering, right? This is the truth of suffering. So any state that one would experience before truly seeing with understanding the depth of emptiness in existence, it is dukkha satcha, right? It is dukkha satcha. Now this is, in a way, now let's take again into perspective the perception of the village, the perception of the people, the perception of the forest. The perception of the village and the perception of the people, the state of oneness, due to being within a state of oneness, the perception of the village and the perception of the people are missing. Hence, that moment of oneness is empty of the perception of the village and the perception of the people. However, there is still something here. And that something is the truth of suffering, right? Is the dukkha satya. Let's move on, right? Thus, Ananda, this is his truly real, undistorted, utterly pure descent into emptiness. Into emptiness, right? Into emptiness.
How dispenser takes you there?
The perception of the earth. Furthermore, Ananda, a monk, not attending to the perception of the people, not attending to the perception of the forest, then attends to the oneness dependent upon the perception of the earth. Now, it is shifting from, right? Now, the person who is coming here, remember, the person who is coming here is not a normal, goof off the street, as we might call it. He's not just this normal person who's coming in. This is a person who has a sense of ability and talent in knowing or is familiar with, is familiar with the sense of oneness, samadhi. Samadhiය යම් තාක් දුරට දියුණු කරපු පුද්ගලෙක් ගැන තමයි දැන් අපි කතා කරන්නේ. Right? Someone commented that my signal is getting better, so I'm showing off. All right. Now, what is the perception of the earth? The perception of the earth is the earth kasina. Right? The perception of the earth is the earth kasina. Now, the moment the earth kasina comes into discussion, then we should know almost instantaneously what is the path to follow. Then it should be kasina, jhana, vipassana, nibbana. Right? Kasina, jhana, vipassana, nibbana. That is now the path that is now spoken of here. Or else, what else? Right? True Suññata is nibbana. Right? True Suññata is the experience of that ultimate sense of freedom and liberation from the hindrances and anything which keeps us bound to samsara. Right? So, seeing nibbana, now the perception of kasina comes into play. Let's see what it says. Simile of the, his mind plunges into page number 45, paragraph 5. His mind plunges into that perception of the earth, and he brightens with faith, steadies his mind, and becomes resolute. Right? Resolute. He is no longer, you cannot deviate him anymore. He is fixated upon being aware, developing that focus based on the kasina. Right? Now that did not come from just anywhere. Where did that come from? The oneness of mind. Right? That oneness that we practice. So the anapanasati that you're practicing, right? That is what is going to give you that firm ability of resolution when it comes to your path of practice. And remember, to this resolution, it doesn't give two hoots about anything which is around you. You are clear, you are resolute. Just imagine there is one road in the middle of a desert, right? There's one road in the middle of the desert. You know that in this road, your car breaks down, or someone is dying, someone is dead. Whatever happens, there is only two ways to go. Either you can go back or you can go forward. In this regard, either you can stop practicing altogether or else you can go forward. There is only one thing. You are resolute, you're clean, whatever happens, right? That there is only forward to go. In that way, the mind is very clear upon where it has or wants to go, right? That is brought about by this sense of oneness that we develop as a prerequisite for this type of mentality. Yes, Del, you want to say something?
I'll just ask and clarify for myself. Bhante, so when you say resolute, are you referring to the Chaitasika, the Pakinnakavan occasional decision, Adimokka? Is that what you are talking about? Your mind is like the other. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, at this stage, it would be wrong for me. Yes, of course, Adimokha is there. Adimokha is there in every decision that we make, right? But here, we are not talking, because it would be wrong to bring that perception into this, because this is samadhi, this is samatha.
Right. Okay, man.
Right. But yes, if we are speaking of resolution is a derivative, or is a function rather of that said Chetasika.
Or can we say that this is the practice of Adhisthana, which is one of the perfections you're practicing? So that's not going into the Abhidhamma part. Adhisthana.
No. So this resolute is more arising. This resolute is more arising. It arises more from the clear, visible evidence, or the clear visibility of the path.
Okay.
Right. Now, for example, if we say aditthana, we can determine, okay, you dream about something. You're so inspired by this dream that you have just seen, that now you determine. That can be aditthana, right? Here, in this case, right? You can delve into, because why is it, Dil, that I am not going according to the word aditthana? Read the line. His mind plunges into the perception of the earth. There is no doubt in that mind. There is no hesitation whatsoever. The mind will never, in a wholesome practice, the mind has, even in a wholesome practice, the mind has to be, for the word plunge to be used here, the mind has to know so clearly the states by which it is now operating with, the states it is operating with, not by which, the states it is operating with. It is because of that awareness and understanding of what is the path, made possible by the one-pointedness, which has again suppressed the hindrances, right? That one is able to plunge into the perception of the earth, right? Into the perception of the earth so easily,
so
without hesitation.
So would it be then that you don't have the hindrance, which is the third fashion, that vichikicha, the doubt is completely gone. You're so sure in your mind.
No. We can't say the doubt is completely. Then you have attained the first stream entry now.
One of them only, not all three. That's just the third one.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
We can't say doubt is completely gone. No, that would be of course, that is we are guessing so, but that is not going to be.
Thank you, Bhante.
And can doubt completely go missing without the other two hindrances going missing? Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, but the doubt is that you have no doubt in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. So it doesn't mean that, you know, the other things like, before doubt goes, like your attachment sila, but the paramasa is a much easier one to go before doubt goes. And I mean, most of us, do we have doubt in the Buddha Dhamma? I think the difficult one there is self, isn't it? Because I think that one is the most difficult. Anyway, Bhante, it's okay, Bhante, I understand.
No, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Can we get rid of doubt, without getting rid of the others? What do the others think?
So doubt is skeptical doubt in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. So I suppose not really, because a part of the Dhamma is that completely, if you understood, but these are degrees, isn't it? Like Sakkaya Ditthi is a mild stage, but Avijja is when the whole thing goes completely. So anyway, it doesn't, I understand what you're saying, Bhante. So we go on with the lesson. Thank you.
This is very much part of the lesson. So Dale wants to come out of the spotlight. Okay.
I want to delay the others in the class, Bhante.
No, I want to know what the others think about, what do you think? Do you think doubt can be missing? Doubt cannot be there. With the other mentalities, do you think one could, of course, it is when doubt, attachment to rites and rituals, and skeptical doubt, attachment to rites and rituals. What's the other one?
Sakkaya Ditthi.
So Sakkaya
Ditthi.
Yeah, that's skeptical doubt.
No, that is Vicikiccha. Vicikiccha is skeptical doubt. Silabhada Paramasa.
Yeah, self-view, yes. So thank you, Dil. So do we think that, or do you think it is possible that we get rid of one aspect before the other? What do you think? Damse? Any thoughts, Damse? Can't hear you.
Just following
I
that thought.
I think you can only suppress it. And
why do you think so?
Because you still living in the sensual world, and you are not entered to the path actually. And yeah. Okay, let's ask Mala.
What do you think, Mala? Do you have an idea? Kingsley had something for us.
Maybe.
Kingsley, you wanted to say something? No? Okay. Is Mala unmuting the mic? No. Huh?
Mala.
I haven't thought about it before, Bhante. This is the first time when you asked the question. I thought when you attain Sottapana, it's one marga, and in one mind moment, you get rid of the three hindrances and become Sottapana. That's what I think.
I mean, there should be a reason, no? I think that's an interesting question. For me personally, of course, I don't believe personally that you are able to get rid of one hindrance, just one hindrance, because first of all, as per what we have studied, the cutting off of the hindrances happens through the Magga Chitta, right? Through the Magga Chitta. For the Magga Chitta to have that reaction at that moment, or the cause and effect behind what allows the Magga Chitta to arise, giving us that result, should say that the cause and effect for the Maggachitta to arise is both, of course, the level of the hindrances being suppressed and the hindrances which are now able to be removed because they are so weak. So I would see an interdependence upon or between these hindrances themselves, where one's weakening leads to the weakening of the others as well, which of course is surely there, right? Which is surely there. But the three hindrances that we would see, first falling away with the Sotapanna path and fruit, should be more strongly interdependent upon each other than the others, I would imagine, you know.
But the three fetters, Bhante, not the
The
hindrance.
three fetters, yeah.
Bhante, I fully understand what you're saying, because even in the Noble Eightfold Path, there is interdependence on the Sukha. So it's not that you get the first, you do the Sakka, go Sakka, you do Samadhi, and then you go to Samma Sankappa, and then you do all the other. They always say it's interdependence, and they grow together to get the Panya. So I can understand what you're saying. Like that, you can weaken things, but they have to be balanced for the ultimate realization, because that's the same way they explain for the Arya Ashtangika Marga. You don't just finish off the first one, Samadhi, and then the Samma Sankappa, and then whatever Samma Sammanta, or you don't go in order like that. There is the dependence of all, and when you grip all only at the end. So I fully understand what you're trying to explain, Bhante. That
So moving on, thank you. The perception of the earth. Furthermore, Ananda, one not attending to the perception of the people, not attending to the perception of the forest, then attends to oneness dependent upon the perception of the earth. Now the oneness is no longer dependent upon the perception of the forest. Now it is dependent upon the perception of the earth, which is the earth kasina. His mind plunges into the perception of earth, and he brightens with faith, steadies his mind, and becomes resolute. Now, here he brightens with faith, right? Here, faith is referring to Akaravati Shraddha, right? Akaravati Shraddha. Akaravati Shraddha, or the Shraddha which is born, or what would be the English translation of Akaravati Shraddha? Do we know? Someone will come up with it, I think. So Akaravati Shraddha, which is Shraddha or faith, which has the roots of wisdom supporting it. Akaravati Shraddha, now I mentioned earlier, the Shraddha is not a word that we often find in our text. Shraddha, here, let's take a look at what allowed or what we have now covered to arrive at this place. We had a sense of oneness, which was made possible by our meditation. First, of course, it was coming out of or going beyond the perception of the village, which requires wisdom. Then we went beyond the perception of the people, which required wisdom. We attained to a certain amount of oneness dependent upon the perception of the forest, which required again wisdom, attention, thus reinforcing this type of samadhi. Then we move from that state of oneness dependent upon the perception of the forest to a state of oneness dependent upon the state of the earth kasina, or the perception of the earth, where now this perception of the earth gives rise to a kasina, which is because of the suppression of the hindrances. That suppression of hindrances means that our minds are less deluded and distracted by everything else in the world, right? is less deluded and distracted by everything which is with all the other things in the world. This allows one to now see the world with the eye of wisdom, if we might call it that, right? Because now the mind is operating at a different level. This is not vipassana wisdom. However, you do have a purer contemplation, awareness, a purer awareness scope with regards to everything that we operate with in the world. That has brightened faith. That is what supports akaravati shraddha to arise, nothing else, right? Nothing else. Now, for example, I think a clear definition is a clear differentiation should be built here. Why? When we, let's take the people, they have no idea whatsoever what is a Dhamma, right? No idea whatsoever what is a Dhamma, right? No idea whatsoever about what or how one attains Nibbana or even the importance of Nibbana, right? Has no idea. However, is a well-mannered individual living a respectable life, and culturally being Buddhist or being brought up Buddhist, respects the religion or respects the figureheads of the religion with due respect, right? Now, of course, there is high emotional intelligence here, maybe. However, that does not amount to akaravati shraddha. Or that shraddha is not going to be something which is going to, or which is born completely of wisdom. That is not the shraddha or the faith that the Buddha refers to in a way of yes, Dil.
Bhante, I think akaravati satta is reasoned faith as opposed to akandita satta, which is rootless faith.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. Now, that akaravati shraddha or reasoned faith or faith with this support of wisdom does not arise in a person who does not know. Here it has clearly arisen. Why? Because of the practice, right? Because of the practice. That is a type of faith that is supported within the practice. All of the types of faith is a disruption to the practice, is a disruption to the practice. Any questions? Right. When I said this just now, I remember the example of yes, it is uploaded, Ravini, online. I remember in love, right? Unconditional love is not a hindrance to Nibbana, right? Unconditional love is not a hindrance to Nibbana. Why? Because unconditional love is not attachment based, right? It is not a result of one's need to prolong one's existence in samsara or to own something or to accumulate something. It is a selfless sort of love, which is all about giving rather than getting anything, right? Similarly, Shraddha without faith is a disruption. I'm sorry. Shraddha without wisdom is a disruption to the path. Shraddha with wisdom is not a disruption to the path. Right? Is not a disruption to the path. Moving on. Simile of the bull's hide. Just as a bull's hide becomes free from crinkles when fully stretched with 100 stakes, even so Ananda, a monk, not attending to any of the highs, dry areas, and the hollows swampy areas of this earth, nor to rivers that are difficult to ford, nor to sharp stumps and thorns, nor to rugged mountains, attends to the oneness dependent upon the perception of the earth. Attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. Right? Perception of earth. That should be understood. Whether the fires of hell is consuming the world, one is not disturbed and sort of perturbed away from the object of the kasina. Now, this is the kasina. Just imagine the amount of effort or commitment demanded when it comes to the attainment of nibbana, right? Attainment of nibbana. So when it comes to death, when it comes to dealing with experiences that are unanimous with the 8 vicissitudes of life, right? We might be suffering, we might be sort of going through, but resilience is important. Continuing the practice is important, right? And that requires a very high amount of emotional intelligence. That requires a very high amount of power, agility, stamina of mind and body, I think, right? We should enable one to sort of to do this. And remember, your best friend is wisdom, right? Your best friend is going to be wisdom, because that is what is going to tell you to keep on going, right? To keep on going. Now, just as a bull's hide becomes free. Now, that simile, right? A bull's hide. So usually when you sort of, you have the hide of any animal, a leather, right? When you dry it, what you essentially do, or how they dry it, is they put it on these sort of wooden, sort of, on wood, or even on concrete, no, really on wood, or even trees sometimes, or stretch it out. And they sort of nail it down, they stretch it as much as they can, and they nail it down, and they leave it in the hot sun for it to sort of dry out, right? So that is what is speaking about. Even likewise, the mind is sort of stretched into many directions. However, it is focused upon doing what it has been doing, right? Focused on doing what it has been doing. What is that? Attending to that sign, right? Attending to that sign. So, for example, you might be going through the practice, you might be practicing vipassana. Anytime, even at times when your loved ones are dying, or even if you are dying, right? We try, or we attempt to keep to that practice of vipassana. Understanding that element of impermanent suffering and non-self. Understanding that element of even that pain, if you are going through that pain during those last moments, and you are almost sure that this is going to be your last couple of minutes or your last hour, in your mind knowing that even whatever pain that you are going through, or whatever suffering that you're going through as a whole, because of disease, illness, old age, suffer, whatever it is, that it is now coming to an end. Impermanence. Impermanence, right? Whilst impermanence to some, it can be a really grueling thing, impermanence, Impermanence can also, it can, to a person who takes it and uses it as a very clear tool that has really been understood, it can be very, very beautiful, right? And it is in that method and mechanism that we sort of use that sense of impermanence in times of, facing those sort of moments. So in similar ways, when it comes to practicing jhana, when it comes to practicing that sense of samadhi with these difficulties going on, right? It should be understood that there is a deep sense of understanding of the world, even at this level, right? Even at this level, right? That is what would a loved one, there is hell raging outside your doorstep. However, you are keeping to the practice, right? You are keeping to the practice. And that is very, very important. It is difficult. It is very difficult. It is one of the most difficult things in the world. Because sometimes when someone that you love is dying, all you want to do is really cry, or all you want to do is in some way or the other show your affection, show your love, show all that you are. But as long as that emotional attachment is there, not in a way of showing love, but in a way of thinking that those emotions are a true representation of your love. Enjoying your food is not going to cause you suffering, right? That is not the truth of suffering. It is this attitude that we have that makes us potent to suffering. That attitude that we build, that choice that we make. And it is through this wisdom we try to understand that is not going to, for example, if we logically look at it, 50 years of marriage, for example, is not going to be appeased by a day of crying. You know what I mean? It is almost disrespectful that you think that you could cry for a day or for a week and then get on with your life, and that is a proper sort of repayment for the 50 years that that person spent with you, right? But we assume, we think that this sort of emotional disaster or this state of emotional calamity that we find ourselves in is what we ought to do, is the way that we show our love. But it really isn't. It really isn't. It is in the ability to understand that that necessity to show love is not required. However, it is a sense of gratitude within your heart, which is most important. That is the Dhamma, isn't it? Because how is this person going to see? Out of that gratitude, you do danas. Out of that gratitude, you tell your grandchildren about their grandfather or grandmother or whoever it is, or that loved one. Out of that gratitude, right, you continue to love and respect that person in your heart, right? Collapsing your life into a state of deep depression, like these potholes that is spoken of here, is not the right repayment. We live our life with great emotional stability and intelligence, but at the moment of loss, we completely collapse, right? But to do this, to have this energy, there must be a strong suit of support, supporting your mind, right? Knowing that you're well supported. If you are going to know, if you know in your heart of hearts that after death, you are going straight away, you are moving in, right, to a fully stocked mansion with servants and a stocked fridge and a beautiful palace and a garden, all of that, you'll be like, come on, let's off that machine. I'm ready to go. You're ready to say goodbye, right? And the Buddha says, as if you are in a state of mind that you're so confident that your life, with the love that you've given, with the life that you've lived, that you have done so much of good towards yourself. Yes, of course, bad here and there, of course, but still done so much of good, right? And loved and given. That confidence itself that is merit, isn't it? That is that good energy, isn't it? When we remind people of the good that they do, that is merit. That gives people the energy to sort of excel their minds, to arouse a sense of deep enjoyment, really, or more a cherishing of their life, which enables them to sort of move on. Right? So there is a deep amount, a lot of wisdom behind this practice at that moment. Moving on, right? Moving on. Attends to the oneness dependent on upon the perception of the earth. His mind plunges into the perception of the earth, brightened with faith, becomes steady and resolute. He understands thus, being resolute as a result of those sort of hindrances which you discussed. Whatever disturbances there might be on account of the perception of people, there are none here. Whatever disturbances there might be on account of the perception of people, there are none here. How do we know that this account of perception of people, that it is no longer there? First of all, the awareness upon the levels of vitakka and vichara arising in the mind, right? You are aware of these things. It is that level and state of awareness which allows you to now differentiate vitakka, between vitakka and vichara, or between vichara and vitakka, vichara, piti and sukha, enabling you to get rid of these states. So your mind does, or becomes very sort of aware and precisioned by that difference between those qualities, right? Between the differences of those qualities. And when that perception no longer exists, why? The perception no longer exists because now your perception is the kasina, right? The kasina. There are none here. Whatever disturbances there might be on account of the perception of forest, there are none here, right? There are none here. There is only this much disturbance, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the earth. He understands thus. Why is that a disturbance? The truth of suffering, right? The truth of suffering. So everything which has some sort of relation to suffering is now got rid of, right? Is now got rid of. 8:15. Okay, we are going to finish this paragraph. He understands thus. This field of perception is empty of the perception of people. This field of perception is empty of the perception of the forest. There is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. Thus he regards what is not there as empty. What is not there is seen or regarded as empty. But as to what remains there, he knows what that is. Thus there is this suffering, the truth of suffering. Thus, Ananda, this is truly real, undistorted, utterly pure descent into happiness, right? Into happiness. Any questions? Now, how does, there should be a lot of questions here, especially, how does that work, right? How does that work? You know, how is that practically possible? Now, when it comes to a person who is not at this level, right? Now, we are now talking about a person who is within or has gone into the jhanas, absorptions relating to the earth kasina, right? And that can be applied to any other kasina as well, right? Basically anything which gives way to jhanic bliss, absorption, right? So when it comes to a mundane person, right? When it comes to a mundane person who is practicing, right? What would be true for that person? Or how would that person be able to practice this, right? The truth of the matter is the fact that he cannot, right? He cannot practice this. He cannot practice shunyata or sort of go into the entry of understanding shunyata to this extent, because shunyata, or that level of sight, arises in a person, of course, with that conceding level of samadhi. However, when it comes to a contemplative effort of shunyata, emptiness, we know and understand, for example, let us say, there is so much of suffering in the world. Suffering that could not be concluded, if put on a list, could not be ever concluded. To that extent, there is so much of suffering, different variations, different types of suffering in this world. But surely it is suffering. It gives rise to pain, emotionally and physically. You have your set of sufferings, or things that cause suffering in your life. Now, I know in the English language, suffering is such a rough, aggressive word, isn't it? It is almost like the word hatred, which is a very, very strong, powerful word in the English language. So one must understand that when we are using these translated sort of words, which is really suffering is dukkha, and for example, hatred is dosa. The word dosa would relate to anything which has friction in it. The friction and the need to sort of push away. That is what dosa is, right? Not just hatred, which is an extreme proportion or extreme standard of the word dosa, right? Similarly in suffering. Now, we have all of these different sorts of suffering, but you have your fair share of suffering, which is relatable and resonates with your life at the moment, right? Someone's like, maybe you're hungry, maybe you've not had dinner yet, right? And I'm keeping you here, so you are, in suffering. That's why I'm creating suffering for you, right? In a similar way, we have different sorts of suffering. Now, you have the suffering, for example, of, let's say, not being able to eat, right? Not being able to eat. You have food at home, right? But you're not able to eat it. Why? Because you are currently participating in a Dhamma class, but you're really, really hungry. You are free by the fact that you do have food in your house and you're able to afford food to feed yourself and your family. You are free of the suffering of not having food at all, right? With the lack, or with the missingness, with the fact that that proportion of suffering, which is not being able to feed yourself or your family, because that suffering is not there in your life, what do you have? Now a sense of emptiness of that suffering. Now every living moment, right? Do you imagine, or somewhat like what the Christians do, give praise and grace to God for the food that he has laid on the table, right? I mean, we don't live like that every single moment. We are not giving praise to to anything or anyone, or do we, we were, what I mean? We don't live giving praise. So just because you don't have that proportion of suffering does not mean that you have happiness, isn't it? Because if you're giving praise and jumping up and you're so sort of, you know what I mean, like you've just won the lottery, right? If you're jumping up, that would mean by the lack of suffering, you now have happiness, which is not really true, right? Which is not really true. Which is not really true. What we now relate to is because that suffering is not there in my life, that my life is empty of that specific suffering. Do you get it? That is what is in the sutta, with, of course, a support of jhana and kasina, right? But being able to understand, now, for example, let us say, because, for example, you're doing all of this good study, right? Because you're doing all of this good study and sort of commitment towards the understanding of Dhamma and trying to sort of, support your path of practice and, trying to sort of purify the mind and all of these things that you might be aspiring and currently doing. You are relieving yourself of a lot of suffering. What might that suffering be? That suffering could be maybe, because you're currently studying, you're relieving your family or you're relieving yourself of any quarrels that you would be having at this time, right? Or any sort of trouble that you could get into, any sort of trouble that you could get yourself into, or any sort of, or being downstairs and being annoyed at, something that someone else is doing, right? As we go on the path, this suffering, now it becomes less personal. Because, why would you make it personal? Yes, you might be having a argument with your partner at home. The neighbor is probably doing the same at the moment. And the neighbor after that is probably also doing the same at the moment. Probably, not to put everyone in a grim light, but possibly everyone has their ups and downs. This we understand. Now, this is an important point, remember, because this we understand as the nature of the world, the nature of relationships, the nature of the hindrances, the nature of tanha ditthimana, the nature of the roots, where this arising and passing away, where this constant flow of different energies happen, and it has an arising and passing away. Now, with wisdom, what happens is, now, for example, one could be offended by the fact of saying, oh, I'm, when we would say, I am free from the suffering of impoverishment. One could be impoverished. I'm free from the suffering of being impoverished. And because of that, someone might take it personally and say, oh, okay, I have to live it. It's my reality. So my life would be absolute suffering. But that is taken because there's a personal aspect to this. Remember, when wisdom arises and Suññata meditation is done, there is no personal here. It is the nature. It is nature. In that nature, being free of the cause which gives rise to that effect of suffering is what is regarded as emptiness. The lack of those causes which gives rise to that effect at that moment is what is then deduced and understood to be what is empty. That freedom from that state. Right? Now, for example, as you have matured, are you going to be picking an argument with a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old? you're going to just, you're going to be very compassionate. Sometimes, of course, 7 and 8 year olds now also are, impossible. Oh my gosh, what is the world turning into? Right? However, let's take about 20 years back, yes, you will not pick a fight with them. Right? You'll not pick up a fight with them. It is getting increasingly difficult, isn't it? As time goes by, you're not picking a fight with them. Why? Because of that sense of maturity of mind that you might have. Right? Now, anything that they're going to say, do, or behave in, you are going to take it in a more compassionate light of understanding. Not because you love the child or anything of that sort. You know that it's a child. It's an infant. Right? Hence, you're not going to take anything of that. You're not going to take it in a serious way, even if it is to cry, or even if it is not going to hug you back, or something of the sort. Right? Just imagine that same thing here, but with so much more supportive wisdom, which enables you to completely be free of that point of perception. Mind you, that within the sutta, the repetitive word was perception. It was referring to suffering, which was created by a type of perception. We spoke of suffering before. We spoke of suffering being a choice. Why? Because it was that way by which you look at the object, which causes suffering. Perception. Right? Perception. That enlightenment, the result of enlightenment, gives you a peaked level of awareness supported by wisdom, which allows you to now live without that suffering, or that potency, or that sort of magnetic pull to that which is suffering. Right? That which is suffering. So the word perception is repetitive throughout this sutta as we go on. Right. So 8:30. Do you have any questions? All right. So then thank you very much. We will try to finish the sutta next week, because now we have really gone over the main facts of the sutta. Now it is just going into the different types of infinite consciousness and the different types of jhanas, right? And then leading on to the abiding, which is state of vipassana, the attainments, right? But it is very peculiar, it is very particular that in many of these suttas that we find the mentioning of jhanic samadhi leading on to vipassana. But remember that, of course, both notions or both parts are mentioned, where there are states of reasoning where it is only the speaking of vipassana, and then there are states speaking where it is both samatha and vipassana. So, there are many parts. So in this specific sutta, we go ahead with this sort of, because in sort of Suññata is always possible when you have been able to suppress the hindrances. Or else this intrinsic quality that we all have within us to personalize everything comes into play. And at that moment, it's going to become an ego game. Oh, I'm not in that level of poverty. Or I am doing better than that person because I don't have that amount of those, I don't have little kids anymore, so I am living a much more, can you hear the ego in those words, in those sort of comparative, because there is a fine line. That is why, Suññata is not a practice which is done by people who do not have this sense of, do not have the skill of samadhi, because it is very easy for that practice to turn into an ego practice, right? Lucky, Kingsley, you have unmuted your mics. Do you want to ask anything? Okay, probably a mistake. Good. So today I would like to share merits with Miri's mother, who passed away, I think, today. Miri is not expecting this, but Miri, I'm sharing merits with your mother. So with all the good merits that we have all accrued through Dhamma study, through Dhamma Sakhacha, to the learning of Dhamma, we have actually done so much. How many hours that we, how many hours are we really all putting into Dhamma, right? And which is such a blessing. With all the power of Dhamma that we have accrued, with all these meritorious positive energy, may we share it with Miri's departed mother, wherever she might be. May she be well and happy, supported by all the Samyadushka Devatas, supported by good friends and family, and by the power of all these merits, wherever she might be, may she find her path into Dhamma, leading to her liberation, into attainment of Nibbana, however she is. And with that, let us all share in all of these merits as well. May we all be protected. May our Dhamma practice, may we have the energy to continue our Dhamma practice, however or wherever we might be, and upon and may we be able from moment to moment work through heightening our practice of Dhamma to reaching higher states of mind, and finally being able to attain the peerless path of Nibbana. So with that, may we all be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Take care and good night. I will see you all on Saturday.
Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Everyone, Saranai. Thank you.
Everyone, Sarnai Bante, everyone, Sarnai.